Hello, good morning or good afternoon, everyone who has already joined and logged into this webinar. My name's Jimmy. I will be your host today along with Jess. It is 10:58 right now, so we are scheduled to start at 11 a.m. Pacific. So we'll just give a couple more minutes for the rest of the gang to join, but stay still, I guess, and we'll get started right away. All right. Well, good morning or good afternoon, everyone, depending where you are. Welcome to Function Point's webinar that's going to focus on best practice reports to drive agency growth. My name's Jimmy Wu at Function Point. I am the Director of Sales and Marketing here. And my co-host, Jess Bird, who is our Customer Success Manager. So hopefully a lot of you would have spoken to her as well. But I do see some names I recognize, so welcome. It is 11 a.m., so let's get started here. If you have just joined, please make sure, do know that this session will be recorded and available for sharing afterwards. So we will be emailing that to everyone. Secondly, there is in your GoToWebinar control panel, there is a question section. So if you want to raise your hand or if you have a question that pops up, please don't hesitate to just punch it in. We'll try to get to as many questions as possible. If we're not, but Jess, throughout the entire webinar, will be answering them as quickly as she can. So thank you in advance, Jess, for that. All right, so let's dive in. I hope you all are going to enjoy this roller coaster ride. I think this is going to be really, really fruitful. A lot of times, you know, as for myself, I've been a project manager before. I worked with a lot of companies like HP doing marketing campaigns for them where they really needed a lot of reports. So a lot of my colleagues call me a reporting freak, and they might be right about that. So hopefully you gain something from me after this. Jess, who is our customer success manager, she worked with me a lot, and she has over 10 years of training in software implementation for SAP, Salesforce, and other software as well. So she's actually shared with me a lot of the reports that people ask for too. So our agenda for today, so we are going to go through, first off, what are the top questions people at agencies ask to solve business challenges? What are the data and insights that they're looking for? And then compare that to what they actually use inside 2019. So what reports are people pulling from Function Point? And then we'll talk about, we'll share with you based on our experience over the past couple of years of what people are asking and especially since we released the new BI reporting tool, what are some of the interesting custom reports that people have built that would be really helpful and give other agencies insights to their processes. And we'll talk about how you can get those information from FP. And then last thing, that I always tell people when they first look at reporting is I give them 3 tips on what to be aware of when looking at the report so that you're making the right business decisions and you're analyzing it properly. Okay. So let's get started. Top questions asked. So out of all the questions agency ask us or that we hear, the 2 main things is that they're trying to find out is where do we make or lose money? And our staff working efficiently. It all boils down to these 2 things. So let's break it down a little bit. So making or losing money. So the first main part is what do we spend them? That thing is looking a little weird. What do we spend the most time on? Okay, which jobs, which clients, and which services? The second one is, do we estimate accurately? So this is a lot of the project when it goes over budget or when you are become unprofitable, really boils down to, are we estimating properly? Did we get the right number of hours right off the bat? Are we providing too much discount? And did we allocate enough time so that we can provide the quality of work needed? The third one is, what services should I sell? So a lot of owners, finance people are really trying to grow their agency. So what services should I sell? So they're trying to understand what's the market demand? What type of services are providing me the most margin? And do I have the staff skill sets to actually meet those demand and provide those services at a quality manner? So that's really about making or losing money. Now, the other big part is working efficiently. So the top 3 things is, 1, are resources utilized correctly and effectively? So we all know for agencies, a lot of your assets are your people, is your billable hours. That's where all your money is made. So making sure that your resources are efficient, that you're doing the quality work with the minimal revisions is important. Are we meeting the billable target? So a lot of finance people will be looking at this, hey, if our target is 75% billable for each of our designers, are we actually getting that? Are we at 70%? Are we at 90%? Or are we at 30%? And last but not least is, do we need to hire? So you might have a large campaign that you foresee coming up. Do you have the resources to actually meet that demand? The worst part for any of your customers to work with you and then they're strapped. You know that you're strapped on resources. You're scrambling to hire freelancers. So how can we plan for that? So hopefully, some of the work planning view improvements that you've seen in the past couple months will be helpful for that. If you haven't explored that, do reach out to your customer success manager to discuss that. So the fun part is, what really surprised us when I was looking at these numbers is that although really owners, a lot of agencies are asking both sides of the question, the profitability versus the staff efficiency, equal amount. But when they look at reports, the go-to reports they look at is the budget and the profit side. So looking at profit analysis, job estimates versus actuals, 60% of the reports pulled are relating to that. And only 20% of the reports are actually relating to staff productivity, relating to the time that they pull. Okay, and there's of course 20% that's unaccounted here. Those are more operational. So looking at who's tracked time, which invoice, how many invoices have we created, things like that. But from a BI perspective, business intelligence, there is an imbalance between what people pull. So let's take a look at the reports that people are pulling. I'm hoping that since a lot of you are already using Function Point, that you're familiar with the staff efficiency, staff utilization reports that are already on there. And of course, the job summary and profit analysis report that you pull on a regular basis. What I want to do today in the webinar is really dive into reports that are probably you probably haven't seen before, so that are very helpful. So the 4 main ones is for each role. So we'll talk about it from a project manager, an owner, a finance, versus the traffic. So as I started with the project manager first because, like I said, this is dear to my heart, and average burn rate is a very big thing for me because when I was a project manager doing campaigns, I knew which one of my customers I spent the most time on was really high maintenance, but I could never justify it. So with our new with Function Point, you can easily grab that information. So to access, let me jump into our system and show you how you can do that. So I'm going to go into our new BI reporting module. So if you haven't explored the new BI reporting module, it's just under the reports and click into the BI reporting section. Now, our new BI reporting tool has segmented into two main parts. So it comes with 26 cookie cutter reports that you can use already. And there is the optional add-on with the premium reporting where you can build your custom reports. So right now what you're going to see is from a custom report that I have built that talks about average budget burn rate. So you can filter this based on the job, by the account executive, by the date. And looking at the information, what I've done here is with the premium reporting tool, I'm hoping a lot of you are familiar with the raw data that comes out. So this is a very standard job report where you can see each line as a separate job, what the estimate versus actuals are versus the invoice. Okay. With the premium tool, I was able to also look at the hours as well and also calculate the burn rate based on the hours in here. So why do we want to, and I can now summarize this into a pivot grid. With the pivot grid on the left-hand side, think of pivot grid as a way to summarize the data, because with the raw data, while you might know one job is more profitable than another, how do I know which customer, for instance, is more profitable? How do I know which type of job I'm making more money? So pivot grid is really the ideal scenario where you want to summarize that data. So in this case, on the left-hand side, we have each individual customer, and my burn rate, every agency calculates burn rate a little bit differently. In this case, what I've done is I've taken the budgeted hours of the job versus the actual hours I've used to look at what's remaining. And then I take the percentage burn rate of that, which is just the estimate minus actual divided by the estimate. Okay. So at this case, I can quickly compare for each company what my average burn rate is. And I can also break it down further if I want and say, okay, Great Atlantic Insurance, while it's profitable, but we weren't profitable, or we actually went over the budget on the remaining hours. Okay. So here's where visualization is much more powerful. While a pivot grid summarizes very well, you can create a bar graph. And I always wished I had something like this to talk to my account reps at that one, back in the days, and tell them, hey, you know what, in this case, you can see Blue Line Digital. They're way more high maintenance compared to every other client that we have. So you can see Blue Line Digital has an average burn rate for all the jobs we do for them. On average, they go over the budget by 18%. Whereas if you look at someone like Great Atlantic Insurance or Home Depot, they're way below the budget. They're much more profitable, right? So this is a very powerful report as a project manager to give the owners, the account reps, the finance people real data of why it is that you guys need to make a change with Blue Line Digital. And it's a very simple report.
Sorry, Jimmy, if I could just interrupt for 1 second. Somebody's asking, what was the original report that you used? So you've got budget burn rate. I know that's what you've named it, but what did you start with when you started creating this one?
The original report I used was the estimate versus actual versus invoiced by company, job, and project.
Perfect. Thank you.
No problem. Yeah, so this is one report. This is probably my favorite report. So now, when I mentioned about when you look at reports, you have to really understand what you're looking at. So in this report, it's telling me that Blue Line Digital is my main problem. sometimes you might need to dig a little bit deeper and understand, is that really the problem, or is it something else? So you can go back into your pivot grid and look at Blue Line Digital and expand this to see, oh, okay, yes, they're more high maintenance, but we actually only did one job for them. And it was that one job, which we all know about. So that's causing that issue. Okay. So you have to be wary of the data that you look at. So make sure that you always go back when you look at your bar graph to go back to your pivot and start looking at the details of, is it the job? Is it the job type? So start asking those type of questions. So I'm hoping this brings up some stimulation for everyone from a reporting perspective. The second report that I want to share is more of an owner perspective. So over the past year, I've actually heard a few owners ask me this. Hey, I want to know my profit margin. You know, everyone looks at their actual profit margin. That's pretty straightforward. You're just looking at what you've invoiced, how much money you've made versus the cost. But more and more, we're starting to hear owners ask and finance people asking, hey, I thought I was going to make 50% margin. How come I only made 30% margin? Okay. So that is a very interesting question. And to me, you want to look at a report for that as well. So for the report, I did start with a report that actually looks at profit analysis, okay, which will show me my actuals. But inside Function Point, if you are using our estimating module properly, you'll be able to actually have your projected revenue versus your projected cost in there. So let me pull up a saved report that I've done as well. So projected versus actual margin is a saved report that I did. And once again, I can filter by a lot of the different fields. So in this case, every single line item, I can see the job and also the services within those jobs that I have. Okay. And then for each one of them, what my estimate is versus my actual, the variance, and what I've invoiced, and the cost. So based on my invoice and cost, I can see what my profit margin is from a dollar value and a percentage. Notice that these two columns have a function in it. So that's actually a calculated column so with our premium reporting tool, you are able to create calculated fields instead of doing that, all of these work in Excel. So here's my favorite part though. The profit margin here is pretty straightforward, but my projected margin is also displayed as well. So you can see my estimated total value versus my estimated cost and my projected margin from a dollar versus a percentage. So you can now create calculated columns that compares what you projected versus your actual margin, what that difference is. So in this case, for the first service, I actually made less than I predicted. Now, just like before, you can even summarize this into a pivot grid as well. So in this case, I've summarized it based on the client again. So I can see for all these clients, because at the end of the day, as a project manager, I'm thinking, yeah, one client is more high maintenance than the other, so that's probably why we made a lower margin. Especially in this case for Safeway, we are 13.5% lower than my projected. And then when I expand this, you can see these are the two jobs associated to that. Here's where I caution everyone. When you look at data, you want to think about who you're talking to. As a project manager, I always thought it was the client's fault. When I became into sales, I'm like, actually, you know what, sales side, yeah, they have other things to consider. You know, they're trying to get the deal in, so they might give a higher discount, things like that. So you, as an owner, as a finance person, and I encourage, you know, whatever role you're in, you want to think more holistically when you look at the data. So for instance, let me reposition this data into a bar graph for you. So what I've done is, on the left-hand side, we have the projected margin percentage, and I've now grouped it based on the job type that we're doing. Okay. And the purple bar shows my projected margin percentage versus the orange bar, which is my actual profit margin at the end of the job. So if I look at this, Safeway might not be the problem, because if I look at this, I can see clearly branding and digital ad, we make a very healthy margin. In fact, what we project and what we actually get is pretty good. But really, signage, video production, website, holy smokes. For signage, we projected a 55% margin on average, but our actual margin is only 8%. And I know Safeway is a retail store and we only do signage stuff with them. So maybe that's why we get a much lower profit margin. So I now need to dig in. Maybe it's not Safeway that's the issue. Maybe it's the fact that how we quote, how we deliver signage is the issue. So I now need to start looking at reports around signage instead. So that's kind of the power of the reporting tool is you can now visualize the data, and you want to visualize the data in all aspects. For instance, I can quickly change this. I'm looking at it by the job type, but I can maybe in the pivot grid, I want to, instead of looking at it by the company and the job, I want to look at it based on the service that I'm providing.
Hi, Jimmy. I've just been asked if you could just slow down a little bit.
Oh, I'm sorry. Sure, I apologize. Like I said, I'm a reporting freak. Sometimes I go a little bit too fast. So thanks for that warning. So in this case, on the pivot grid, so just going back a little bit, you can summarize the data in different ways. Because of the biggest part with our new reporting tool is you can now pull information from different modules of the system and put them in and consolidate them. So for instance, a common question that people used to ask us is, hey, I want to, instead of profitability by the job, I want to now look at profitability by the job type or by the service I'm providing. So if I look at it by the service, in this case, I can add that into my table summary. So I can now see these are all the different type of services I provide on the left-hand side. So for yours, this might be your design, your creative work, or your senior copywriter versus junior copywriter. So you can really break down for each of these services what you typically project versus what you actually get. I can also very quickly, maybe instead of service, I might want to look at by the AE instead. So I can do that as well. So I can see, hey, are there certain AEs where their projected margin is always, their jobs are always going over or under the original projected margin, which may give you an indication of discounts being given too much. So that's from a margin perspective. So the other two reports I want to go through is from more of a staffing perspective. So finance teams often ask us, what's my target versus actual staff billable percentages? So in your function point system, you will be able to target, you will be able to set a billable rate, a billable target percentage for each of your staff. A common question people ask then is like, what's the industry standard for my staff billable? So that answer may vary depending on the role. But if you're talking about a designer, a copywriter, people, your production team, you want to be at roughly between 70 to 80% billable percentage. That seems to be the industry standard. The variation may come from, how much break you're giving people. What's your lunch hour like? Do you have internal staff meetings, et cetera? But 70 to 80% seems to be the industry standard. Now, we do have a built-in report already for that called the efficiency report for all staff. This is really, really cool. You can once again filter by the date range, specific staff group, but I'm going to pull everything here. And in the table view, you'll be able to see on the left-hand side each individual staff member that you have, what their total hours worked is, how much of that was non-billable versus billable work. So the system will calculate the percentage billable automatically for you. I'm just going to zoom in a little bit so you can see a little bit better. Here's the cool part though. As long as you have the permission, you can see the value of those billable hours versus the cost that we pay them. So the dollar variance is almost an indication of how much potential money this individual staff has made for the agency. So the higher number, the better. So in this case, you can see that Beth here, I should probably give her a raise. Sean here, I might need to have a chat with him. Now, sometimes this might not tell the whole story. But if you want to visualize it a little bit better, I'll just show you really quickly. From a bar graph, you can also compare this very quickly. So if we go to the bar graph, you can quickly, for the x-axis, which is at the bottom, this is where you're going to group and look at maybe the name of the staff. Okay, and then I want to see the percentage versus the target. Sorry, just look at the value, billable hour percentage. So with this report, I can also add a new column, such as the staff target percentage. And then that will now carry over when I generate the bar graph. Okay. So now I have the two systems. So the purple bar is the target I've set for the individual staff, whereas the orange bar is what they've actually accomplished. So within function point, you'll be able to go in and see those two differences. So hopefully that gives you a little bit of a glimpse of, because you are using a centralized system, you have a lot of data inside function point. This is the type of BI intelligence that you can use to manage, to make proper business decisions. Now, the last report is a report that I see being utilized by a lot of larger agencies. So when I speak to larger agencies where they have maybe 50 staff, 100 staff, the staff efficiency, instead of looking at what we saw earlier, target versus actuals, this is after the fact. You know, if you're taking a look at this a month or at the end of the month, end of the quarter, it might be a little bit too late. You know, you've lost already a lot of that dollar value and billable time already. So as your traffic team can have a report called staff efficiency by task and service instead. I actually was really blown away when I first saw this report because there's so many things you can do with it. And this is a custom report that I've built as well. And this is based on, and I started with this on the task level, I believe. Okay. So in this report, what I'm looking at is every single individual task, out of all these tasks, who it's assigned to. And I can see, if I scroll to the right, I can see for each task what my budgeted hour is versus the actual hour I spent and the variance.
Hi, Jimmy. Sorry to interrupt. I just have one question.
Sure.
Are the billable hours gross billable or net hours that may be over budget?
So great question. So with the billable hours are a gross. However, with the premium reporting, you can create a calculated column depending on which report you're in that will subtract your actuals versus your original estimated billable hours, so you can see if you are over or under. I hopefully understood that question correctly and answered it correctly. Now, by the way, if there are additional questions, please, I'm sure there will be a lot of questions after this. We did only allocate half an hour, but if you guys, any of you find this helpful, please do let me know, let us know, let your customer manager know, and we'll be happy to continue these type of webinars for you as well. But back to this efficiency report. So for each task, I know what type of service we're providing, so I know the billable rate for each of these tasks based on the hours. And I also know the estimate versus actuals for the tasks of each individual staff they're working on. So when I summarize this to look at each staff individually, I can see out of my 4 staff, Alberto, Depica, Miro, and Ryan, Alberto is on average, using more hours to complete his task than all the other people. In fact, all the other people are doing really good. So let's take a look. Now, do I go and slam Alberto? I might want to dig a little bit more into this. So I can expand this and go, okay, what type of work is Alberto working on? So I can see he did some client management, some coordination, some design, some production work. So I can see he actually does pretty well. He's always in the positive for pretty much all the type of work except production work. So maybe he's a designer. He doesn't really do video production type of stuff. So maybe this is our fault. We need to stop giving Alberto production-related work and just have him focus on what he's good at, which is copy and design. All right. So I guess what I'm trying to say here is when you look, I really find this report helpful because we're not just looking at overall, is the staff efficient or not as a high-level basis, or using my gut feel. I now have real data to look at. If I use our tasking module and tracking time properly, you'll now start seeing which portion, what type of work they do, what are they good at doing, what skill sets do they have. You might think they're good at design work, but then the numbers tell you he always goes over budget. So those are things to keep in mind. I want to let everyone know also, at the end of the webinar, we will be sending out a white paper that will actually provide you with even more sample reports. And it is free to you since you guys all register for this. So you will definitely be able to look through that. Okay. So the last two things I just wanted to go through is a lot of questions come up with, when do I use a pivot grid versus a bar graph versus a line graph? So in general, a table view lets you see raw data. Pivot grid is when you want to summarize your data. So whether you want to see it by a company, by a service, when you say, I want to see by service, am I making money by the customer? Which one of my AEs sells the most jobs for me? That would be a pivot grid. Bar graph is very useful when you are doing comparisons. Did they meet their target billable? So you would compare the target versus the actuals. Okay. Whereas line graph is when you want to see things over time. And your x-axis would always be the dates. So this is the general rule of thumb I always tell people when they're first generating different report visualizations. So the three things, I hope I've been re-emphasizing this along the way, is when you look at any report, the top three things is, one, is it relevant to you? Two, where is that data coming from? This is important because if you know where, if you're looking at a time report and you know that, hey, your team doesn't really track time till end of the month, now you're like, is that data reliable? Do they really remember how much time they actually spent on certain things? Because if that data is not reliable, then you're really making business decision on incorrect data, which can have very long-term impact on your agency. Okay. So third, is it accurate? Okay. They might be putting things on a daily basis, but do you trust that everyone actually does it properly? Have you trained them properly to know, hey, when do you need to track time to this job, a non-billable versus a billable service? Have you trained them properly so that you have the correct target billable percentage for your team? Okay. So those are really the three things I consider as well. Whew, time flew by really quickly there. So we are at 11:31. We know the webinar will be at is scheduled for half an hour. Just a reminder that there is a recording of this webinar which we'll be sharing with you. But if you do have any additional questions, please do email us at success@functionpoint.com. So thank you all again for attending this webinar. If you have feedback, please do provide them. If you would like to see more of these type of webinars, please let us know. And I'd be happy to share even other type of reports that I've seen or even around other areas of Function Point. We will leave. We will leave the webinar open for the next 5-10 minutes, just based on the questions, so that hopefully Jess has been answering them as we've been going along. Well, thank you all again for attending.
Thanks, Jimmy.
Okay, well, everyone, I want to thank everyone again who is still on for attending the webinar. So please note that we will be posting a recording of this webinar on our website, and it will be also sent to you in an email in about 24 hours from now. And once again, you will also receive a white paper of some of the best practice reporting tools that we might not have had time to go through today. So look for that in your email too. And that should also come to you over the next week. Thank you all again for attending, and we'll be closing off this webinar, and hope you all have a great week and found this helpful.